This is the greatest oil trader you have never heard of. This is Marc Rich. He invented spot oil trading and made billions of dollars doing it. But he also traded with Iran, with Cuba, and with apartheid South Africa, all enemies of the United States. And because of that, he had to flee to Switzerland and was on the FBI's most wanted list for 18 years. Now, to understand how he made billions of dollars and maybe where his mistakes came from, we have to understand where he came from. In 1940, Marc Rich was 6 years old in Belgium, fleeing the Nazis. His family eventually made it to Kansas in the United States, and when he was going to college, he went to New York to study marketing at the time. But he quickly found out that he didn't like marketing, and so he got a job at Philip Brothers. This was the largest commodities trading group at the time in America and one of the most successful. And it was here that he really got to get started in the world of finance. He traveled to Bolivia in South America, to South Africa, to Cuba, and got to trade commodities in all these different places. And eventually he was so good that the Philip Brothers put him in charge of their Spanish branch. And then he would make a decision that changes his life and the world forever and leads to him becoming the greatest oil trader of all time, the king of oil. And that is, he enters the oil market for the first time. You see, back then, the oil trade was dominated by 7 companies. It's a cartel called the Seven Sisters, and these guys control 97% of all the oil trade in the world. They set the price through long-term fixed contracts. And so this isn't really a free and open market. But then something happens in 1971. Our boy Richard Nixon takes America off the gold standard, so dollars are no longer backed by gold. Now, how is this relevant to Marc Rich making billions of dollars from oil? Well, we'll get there. Dollars being taken away from gold causes their value to plummet down in the following years. And this causes a big issue for the oil producing nations because remember, oil is priced in dollars. And so the dollar plummeting in value causes a wave of nationalization across the Middle East especially. But now these countries have a problem. You see, they control oil production, but they have no one to sell it to. Remember, the Seven Sisters used to control production and the sale of oil. And that is where Marc Rich and the Philip Brothers come in. He uses his contacts in these oil-producing nations to buy their oil and to sell it to willing partners on the open market, essentially inventing spot oil trading. In the past, you had to trade oil through long-term fixed contracts. Now through Marc Rich, there is a supply and demand. And this makes the Philip Brothers very, 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 very rich. And so Marc Rich just asked for a little piece of what he's created for them. He asked for a small $900,000 bonus. And the Philip Brothers counter and say, listen, man, I know you made us rich, but we'll give you $140,000. Now, if you're Marc Rich, what do you do here? Do you keep enriching your bosses, or do you strike out on your own? Well, he moved to Switzerland and he founded the Marc Rich Company, and this was actually a very good move for him because their group was now able to move faster, they were able to be more aggressive, and they were leaner. There was less employees, they could get more done. And then war broke out in the Middle East. Now, for everyone else in the world, this is a tragedy and a horrible event, but to an oil trader, this is very good news. And so when the Yom Kippur War started between Israel, Syria, and Egypt, things got very good for Marc Rich very fast. You see, the Soviet Union over here, I didn't have a flag for them, so I put the doll. The Soviet Union was backing its proxies in the region, Egypt and Syria. So in response, America got involved and backed Israel in the war, and this caused the Arab countries to put an embargo on America and say they're not going to sell oil to the United States. Now, this caused the price of oil to shoot way up, and people who lived through the 1970s can tell you about the gasoline prices, about the inflation, about the effect that this had on ordinary people especially. But for Marc Rich, this was great news, and his firm began to make an incredible amount of money. In 1974, they sold $1 billion of oil and made $28 million in profit. Next year, they almost double that. They're at $50 million in profit. And in 1976, they make an incredible $200 million in profit. So Marc Rich is killing it. He has a business where the worse things get in the world, the better it is for him. And he continues to kill it going throughout 1979, but you will begin to see some of the mistakes he makes that leads to the FBI trying to hunt him down. You see, in 1979, the Iran hostage crisis broke out. There was a pro-America regime in Iran. They got overthrown, and when they were overthrown, the revolutionaries captured American citizens at the embassy and held them hostage. And so America retaliated in response. Part of that was they refused to purchase Iranian oil. So if you're an Iranian revolutionary, okay, great, we've kicked the Americans out, we control our oil fields, but we have a problem. Who do we sell our oil to? How about a Jew from Switzerland? Well, Marc Rich comes in, he buys oil from Iran and sells it to willing partners, and this should be fine. Marc Rich Group is a Swiss company. They should be neutral in this situation. But Marc Rich is an American citizen, and the United States doesn't like what Marc Rich is doing because he's not only buying from the regime in Iran that just took American citizens hostage, he's buying from apartheid South Africa, he's buying from Cuba, he's buying from Pinochet in Chile. You see, most people would run away from civil wars, coups, and natural disasters, but Marc Rich runs towards them. He's dealing with the enemies of the United States, and he's becoming incredibly wealthy doing so. As it says here, he saw corruption as a cost of business. Bribery and corruption were common practice. And so, America doesn't ignore what Marc Rich is doing. If this guy looks familiar to you, then maybe because he is a young Rudy Giuliani. Before he got famous, before he was the mayor of New York, before he was a lawyer for Trump, Rudy Giuliani was trying to make a name for himself, and he does that by charging Marc Rich. He charges Marc Rich with tax evasion, with fraud, and with illegal trading with enemies of the United States, including Iran. And this causes a huge firestorm in the media. Marc Rich is portrayed as an incredible villain, and he is facing up to 300 years in prison. And so if you're Marc Rich, and you're in New York, the media is against you, Giuliani is trying to charge you with 300 years, what do? Do you go to trial? Well, Marc Rich flees to Switzerland. He just evades it. He runs away. And this is because Switzerland is one of the few countries at the time that did not have an extradition treaty with the United States. And to their credit, the Swiss actually stand up for Marc Rich at the time. America demands that they hand him over, and the Swiss say, no, we're a sovereign country. You have to respect our neutrality. You're not going to boss us around. They see it as an opportunity to stand up for themselves on the global stage. And so America, as they usually do, decide to ignore what the Swiss are saying. There are 2 U.S. Marshals that decide to take the case into their own hands. Now, U.S. Marshals are tasked with grabbing American criminals abroad and bringing them back to America to face justice. And so in 1985, 2 U.S. Marshals arrive in Switzerland disguised as tourists with the goal of capturing Marc Rich. They want to forcibly grab him and move him over the border from Switzerland to Germany or France, and then fly him back to the United States. Now, the great thing is that Marc Rich is easy to find. They know where his office is, so they can literally just camp outside and look for an opportunity to grab him. The bad thing for these marshals is that there's a mole on the inside. And so as the marshals are waiting outside of Marc Rich's office, 2 Swiss policemen approach them and basically tell them, if you take any further actions here, we will arrest you. Because what the marshals are doing is very, very illegal. You can't just do this stuff in someone else's country. And so their plan fails. But the US does not give up on trying to capture Marc Rich. In 1992, he is approached by an old Israeli friend who has a Russian contact, and the Russian says that his government is very interested in doing business with Marc Rich, the infamous oil trader. You see, 1992 was a very pivotal time for Russia. Boris Yeltsin had just taken over, the Soviet Union was collapsed, and there was a wave of privatization. There was billions to be made. And if Marc Rich didn't step in, someone else would. There was just one catch to the oil deal that the Russian proposed. Marc Rich had to go to Moscow to sign it. And if this was a problem, the Russians could even give him a jet. They could fly him to Moscow next week so he could get the papers signed. When Marc Rich told his friend about it, however, he said, quote, "This doesn't sound kosher to me. Who is going to protect you in Russia? They would do anything to please the Americans." So reluctantly, Marc Rich agrees to not go to Russia, to pass on the deal, and it turns out his friend was right. You see, the Israeli who came to him was fine, but the Russian was an asset of the United States. It was all a plot by America to bring him back for justice. And so despite their many attempts to capture him, Marc Rich would live in exile for the next 19 years, until on the very last day of Bill Clinton's presidency, Bill Clinton decides to pardon Marc Rich. Now, this is highly, highly controversial. Marc Rich has been painted in the media as the man who is dealing with enemies of America, one of the worst capitalists, worst businessmen of all time. But he gets away with it. In 2013, Marc Rich dies with a net worth in the billions. On one hand, he created one of the world's largest natural resources companies and broke the monopoly that had controlled oil trading for decades. He enabled reliable trade for developing countries by providing financing, insurance, custom clearance, transport, and storage. This allowed them to grow and develop and prosper in some cases. But he also traded with horrific regimes at times when they were directly opposed to the United States and its citizens, the country that had given him everything. So was Marc Rich a villain or just a good businessman? As the Financial Times put it, yes, he played dirty, but Marc Rich also changed the world. And I think that's the only way to see it. If you want 50 plus free finance and investing tools, just click the first link in the description. And if you want more videos like this one, subscribe to the channel. New ones coming every week. And I'll see you in the next one.